journalists and will continue to support their fundamental work, especially while covering conflicts. Nothing is more dangerous for journalists than covering conflicts and reporting from war zones. During its latest official visit to Palestine in February 2023, our delegation had the opportunity to meet with independent journalists in Ramallah and exchange views with them about the critical conditions and challenges they face while doing their important work. Palestinian journalists operate in a particularly high-risk environment due to the occupation practices and security concerns. Between 2011 and 2021, the UNESCO Observatory recorded 14 killings of journalists in Palestine, 12 of which were reported by Palestine as having been killed by foreign actors beyond their national jurisdiction. Dear colleagues, international human rights law requires prompt, thorough, transparent and independent and impartial investigation into all use of force resulting in death or serious injury. The perpetrators must be held to account. I would like to recall that the European Parliament, in its resolution of 14th December 2022 on prospects for the two-state solution for Israel and Palestine, called upon the EU and its member states to support all initiatives to uphold accountability for violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, and underscored the work of the International Criminal Court in this regard. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Omari.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for this opportunity, through which I aim to share with you the grief and tragedy that my friends, colleagues, and I have been suffering from since the 11th of May 2022, personally and professionally. Shireen Abu-Akleh was an icon in Palestine and the Arab world. She was loved and respected by the Arab world, and her journalistic reputation preceded her. One of the most prominent journalists in the Middle East, Shireen Abu-Akleh was renowned for her decades-long reporting in the occupied Palestinian territories and Israel. During her 25 years working as a reporter and frontline correspondent for Al Jazeera, the Palestinian-American journalist reported extensively on numerous major events in Palestinian history, while also helping analyze the political situation. Shireen dedicated her life to uncovering injustice and spreading the truth about the dire situation Palestinians live under due to the prolonged Israeli occupation. She also reported on Palestinian success stories and accomplishments. Her accuracy and professionalism, as well as her distinct sign-offs, made her a household name across the Arab world, and she became an inspiration to many Palestinian and Arab women to pursue careers in war journalism. As fellow World Press Freedom hero Dawood Kuttab wrote earlier this year, the soft-spoken voice, the emotionless face, and the factual words of Shireen Abu-Akleh will be forever imprinted in the hearts and minds of most Arabs. He added, despite the high emotions of the Palestinian protests, deaths, house demolitions, and the human rights violations she covered, Abu-Akleh's demeanor was always professional. On May 11, 2022, Abu-Akleh was killed by Israeli army fire while reporting on the ground about an Israeli military raid on a refugee camp in the city of Jenin in the occupied West Bank. Many eyewitnesses' accounts and independent investigations have concluded that the gunfire aimed at Abu-Akleh and other reporters came from Israeli soldiers, and that their journalists were deliberately targeted despite wearing distinctive press signs on their vests and helmets. Abu-Akleh was shot in the back of her head and rushed to a hospital where she was declared dead. Days later, at her funeral procession, Israeli police attacked the mourners who attended, beating them with batons. Abu Akleh's killing sent shock waves through the journalism community, and press freedom organizations around the world demanded an independent investigation into the case. Abu Akleh was the latest in a lengthy list of journalists killed by the Israeli military. According to UNESCO, in addition to Abu Akleh, at least 18 journalists in Palestine have been killed by Israeli forces since 2002, and hundreds have been subjected to arrests, destruction of equipment, and physical attacks. All states have a duty to investigate attacks on journalism promptly, thoroughly, and independently, and to prosecute those responsible, even in conflict zones. The deliberate targeting of journalists during armed conflict constitutes a war crime. Moreover, under international law, Israel as an occupying power is obliged to protect occupied people, including journalists. The Israeli government has failed to meet these obligations on several occasions, and Abu Akleh's killing is no exception. Abu Akleh was a pioneer and role model for journalists in the Middle East, especially women journalists, and her ultimate sacrifice for journalism and the free flow of information will not be forgotten. Ladies and gentlemen, all, greeting and respect. We went to the International Criminal Court, ICC, on the 6th of December as the assassination of our dear colleague Shireen Abu-Akleh, journalist and senior correspondent for Al Jazeera, is about to enter the eighth month. We went to demand justice for Shireen. We submitted the file of his heinous crime to the International Criminal Court after all investigations were completed and all evidence and testimonies were provided. We are fully convinced that the Israeli occupation forces are the ones who killed Shireen on the morning of the 11th of May 2022. She was killed while performing her journalistic work professionally at the entrance to the refugee camp in Jenin, north of the West Bank, which was being raided by the Israeli occupation forces at the time. When Shireen was shot directly and fell under the carob tree in the Al-Hadaf neighborhood, she was accompanied by the following colleagues: Ali Al-Samoudi, who was shot in the shoulder a few seconds before Shireen was killed, and Shada Hanaishi and Mujahid Al-Sa'di, who miraculously survived. All of the above mentioned journalists, including Shireen, were wearing the protective breast bullet-proof jacket and helmet marked with a breast bar, making it easier for the occupation soldiers to distinguish these people as journalists. The media team was walking about 180 meters away from the patrols when the occupation soldiers opened fire at them and killed Shireen. All investigations being done by B'Tselem, Al Jazeera Media Network, Bellingcat, New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, The Guardian, the Palestinian General Attorney, and the Forensic Architecture, in cooperation with Al Haq Palestinian Human Rights Organization, have confirmed the following facts. 1. The crew of journalists did not pose any danger, nor did it hinder the work of the Israeli occupation soldiers at their military operation in the area. 2. No warning was given by the Israeli occupation forces to the crew before shooting at them. 3. Ali Samoudi was wounded by a bullet in his shoulder, and seconds later a bullet hit Shireen Abu-Akleh and killed her. 4. The bullet hit Shireen behind her lower left ear, in the area that is not protected by the helmet or the protective vest, and hit the helmet from the inside in the upper right part of the head. 5. The occupation forces continued to shoot live bullets in Shireen's direction even after she was hit, while Shada was screaming and trying to rescue her after she fell at the trunk of the carob tree. 6. About 12 bullets were fired after Shireen was killed, and the effects of the bullets on the stem of the carob tree confirm that the bullets were fired with the aim of killing, as it is height range between 127 centimeters and 178 centimeters. That is, it was aimed to the upper body. 7. The eyewitnesses' testimonies, as well as independent professional, foreign, and local journalists' investigations and videos recorded by a number of colleagues and citizens, confirmed that there were no Palestinian gunmen in the area where the 4 journalists and their colleagues were present, and there was no exchange of fire between the gunmen and the occupation forces stationed at the entrance to the refugee camp. The situation was calm at the time. 8. All evidences and investigations confirm that the bullets that killed Shireen and wounded Ali were fired at them from the same position where the occupation forces had been stationed at the time. 9. The IDF changed its narrative and official declarations regarding the circumstances of Shireen's assassination a number of times, 7 times, during the first 48 hours after she was killed. They changed their versions several times, starting with the claim that they had neutralized 2 terrorists and ending with the claim that she was killed in an exchange of fire and probably by Palestinian armed men. In its latest official announcement on September 5th about the results of an internal investigation, the IDF declared that there was a very high probability that journalist Shireen died as a result of indiscriminate gunfire fired by the army. If this is true, and this is not true, then why did the occupation forces continue to fire at Shireen and Shada after Shireen was killed and fell to the ground? 10. Our conviction that Shireen was targeted by the occupation forces. The following points explain our convictions. A. The nature of Shireen's injury indicates that the bullets were fired by a sniper, because the Fatah bullet hit her in a very narrow area under the ear that is not protected by the helmet or the protective vest. B. The continuous shooting with the aim of killing even after Shireen fell to the ground. C. The vicious assault on the casket in the closed courtyard of the French hospital in occupied Jerusalem while mourners were preparing for the start of the funeral. D. The targeting and killing of Shireen came as a peak in the targeting of Al Jazeera and its crews and offices during the last year in the Palestinian territories, including occupied Jerusalem. This targeting began with the bombing and destruction of the building that houses Al Jazeera's office in Gaza City during the war in May of 2021. Then members of the Israeli occupation police isolated reporter Jivar al-Buderi in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, beating and arresting her in a humiliating manner on June 5, 2021, for about 6 hours in a police station in occupied Jerusalem. When we demand justice for Shireen, we want to hold the killers accountable and at the same time protect ourselves as journalists in general in general, and as journalists in Al Jazeera, in particular, from the opposition of the occupation forces during our coverage of developments and events, so that we can continue to present the truth about what is happening. During the last 2 months, many Palestinians and foreigners visited Shireen's office. But let me tell you about two distinguished groups. Students in the 5th grade from French school in Ramallah, where they are doing a study project, and they chosen the rights of journalists and Shireen as a model. The second group was with hearing disabilities from the Shagaf Foundation in Naples, prepared a mosaic mural for Shireen and olive leaves, in order for this next Palestinian generation not to lose their hope and their confidence in the international community and international law and international legitimacy. We strive to achieve justice for Shireen. We need your help to make sure that these crimes are not repeated. I will end with this. I don't know. Israel must understand that it can no longer act with impunity when it harasses, intimidates, and indeed murders journalists who are trying to undertake their professional duties. This is the most important thing for us, and we thank you again for you give me the opportunity, this opportunity through which I aim to share with you the grief and the tragedy. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor Omari.
Thank you very much, Mr. Omari. Before giving the floor to the MEPs present, I would like to extend a warm welcome to an Al Jazeera journalist who is here with us, who was the best friend of Shireen. I would like to not only extend a welcome to this journalist, but I would also like us to give a round of applause for all Palestinian journalists who are risking their lives by using their microphone, their voice, or their camera. So thank you very much and welcome.
Y ahora invito a los colegas que quieran.
And now, any colleagues who would like to take the floor, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have a possibility to ask questions to Mr. Vileda? Good. So my question to Mr. Vileda, and thank you for joining us, and I'm sorry for the loss of your colleague. My question is regarding to the reactions from your journalistic colleagues in other parts of the world. What reactions have you had, and what kind of solidarity have you witnessed, and what things do you think that we could do as members of the European Parliament to maybe put pressure on European journalists to react to this violence against Palestinian journalists? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also to Mr. Omari, of course, to be with us and for sharing in this this moment the thoughts of Shireen's colleagues, and for reminding us not only what she meant for journalism in general and for women as well in the region. But of course, as well for what her killing means for Palestine and for the rights of Palestinians, human rights, international law. So thank you for that. I think, and Mr. Chair, you repeated it. I think it was important that the European Union condemned the killing very strongly. But I do think, before I've got a question for Mr. Omari, that there's also a question we need to ask the European Union. is that what concrete actions are there going to be in order to make sure that this impunity does not stand? We have taken, to give but one example, we've adopted a resolution on Tunisia in March, in which we condemn limitations to press freedom, and we ask to suspend, as European Parliament, we ask to suspend certain EU programs that support the Tunisian government. Would something similar not also be helpful in the case of Israel? Because obviously the European Union has no credibility in defending press freedom if we do it with double standards, where it only goes for one, or doesn't go for one country, but we only do it somewhere else. And then I have a very concrete question as well, which is in the line of what my colleague said for Mr. Omari. What is the state of solidarity campaigning, and what are the concrete demands? I know there's been a lot of fight about an independent investigation. Where exactly do we stand, and is there anything we can help with, or measures we can take to make sure that this impunity does not continue any longer, especially considering that the state involved, the State of Israel, is an associated country, has an association agreement with the European Union. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Mark. Luena.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this explanation that our today's guest has given us. For those who still haven't condemned this killing, this is important because this description is very clear of what actually happened. So the EU can do something. Yes, I'm sure that's the next point when we'll be looking at the report on our mission. But I think that the European Union did something quite important, really. Not celebrating the in Europe Day with the envoy from Israel, but I think following the relations we're dealing with this afternoon, the last opportunity during the plenary 2 months ago, when there was in the presence of the High Representative, I said in my contribution some of the proposals that we've been dealing with, and this killing that we're discussing this afternoon justifies that we should justifies the imposing sanctions. We should be putting strike. I said that in plenary, and I'm saying it now. And I want to repeat that Spanish companies who are working in some of the projects in Israel must have the information so that they can withdraw. I'm saying it. I said it at the time, and I'm repeating it now. I think this is a route that we have to keep working on. It's very complex. It's difficult. It's realpolitik. But every step that Israel takes justifies a political line or political behavior from the EU. Where basically we really have to study seriously bringing sanctions. Thank you, Margaret Hawken.
Yeah, thank you, and sorry for not being able to be there. But I was really following this here with great interest, and I'll just stress what my colleagues said, Jakob de Lunde, Mark Butanga, and so on, that the reaction from international journalists has been strong, of course, but we need also probably a much stronger pressure on our governments that they could understand that this impunity, and it doesn't only go for Shireen last year. All of it, 220, more than 22 civil Palestinians were killed. Most of them by the IDF, some of them from the settlers, and as far as I know, in any occasion there was an investigation, a follow-up, and there I think that the international press could put, has the obligation to put a much stronger pressure on the EU and absolutely using the case with Shireen, but stressing that this is an ongoing situation, and it happens. Shireen was killed before the new government. It was the former government who was responsible for, the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers, and the more or less protected settlers who went on with this ongoing and terrible violation. And as just said by Mark now, it was Cesar, that we are just calling for reactions so the situation can be changed. So my question would be, what are you doing now in these days to follow up on this totally regime of impunity towards the Palestinians and journalists or ordinary people, children? Happens almost every day. It happens these days too. So that we can be much more in an atmosphere of that Israel has to be held accountable, as well as other countries in the world who violate human rights to these degrees as they do in Israel. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Moi, j'avais quelques questions.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions here. If I'm not mistaken, Shireen had a dual nationality. She was also American. And there was there been any action from the United States? What happened to this claim from the United States? What is going to happen there with this complaint from the United States? Has anything happened? And to go back to what my colleague said, I think it's also very important to denounce what the President of the Commission said, because it is unacceptable when she talks about the promised land of a desert that's been transformed into a garden, that they've been there for over 60 years. I think we need to denounce this, because if you look at this, it's not. This is not her job. She should not have spoken of the promised land. So, but at all events, as my colleague said, we've got to demand some sort of resolution, something on this question, something clear. Clear measures have to be taken. We've done this for Algeria. We did it 2 months ago with Morocco, and the same should happen with Israel. We shouldn't give up. We should show that our institution has a certain position, and it's and does not have two ways of dealing with things. I've seen that some French MPs went to Israel. They went to Tel Aviv, and now they've sent a document where they commit themselves to not take part in protests and things like that. So we're going to have to sign a lot of papers to limit what we can do there. And all of us, each plenary, we ask between the groups what the position is, because this is an important point. We've got to stress this, and we've got to say that it's easy to condemn countries when the journalists are hurt, but not when it's Israel, and that's not right.
Thank Mr. Omari for his opening remarks, and it's good that we have this opportunity on what is tomorrow the first anniversary of the murder of Shireen by the Israeli regime. She was a journalist much admired by her people, and was one who was never afraid to speak truth to power, and for that she makes her a journalist that we would much all admire. And I think society would be a much better place if we had more journalists like her who were not afraid to stand up for what is right. And that thirst for truth and the willingness to then need to communicate it with the wider world cost her life and made her another victim of the Israeli regime's long pattern of deliberately targeting journalists. Over the past 22 years, the Committee to Protect Journalists has documented at least 20 journalists killed by members of the IDF. And despite numerous IDF investigations, the Israeli government hasn't charged or held anyone responsible for these deaths. Yet we will always hear and be told that Israel is a beacon of democracy in the wider Middle East. But one has to question what kind of democracy murders journalists with impunity, or is guilty of apartheid, or deliberately kills Palestinian women and children and demolishes schools and hospitals and evicts families from their homeland while building illegal settlements. Since Shireen's death nearly a year ago, over 200 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank, including 15 children. And in Gaza, the situation is much worse. On Monday night, an Israeli warplane killed 13, including 4 children. And the EU and we as a Parliament need to start actually asking ourselves, what actual proactive measures should we, must we, can we take beyond the mere words that we hear coming from those in senior positions every once in a while? I also think it's important that we would show our support for Shireen's family and their call for accountability to go right to the top of the Israeli military's chain of command, and for this then to go to the ICC. Israeli forces cannot and must not keep killing Palestinian civilians with impunity. For my part, as a member of Sinn Féin, the largest party in Ireland, we will continue to demand justice for Shireen and for all those Palestinians who have been unlawfully killed by Israeli forces for as long as it takes. And I'd re-echo the questions that have been asked by previous speakers in regards to what can be suggested that we do, not only out here in the EU, but also at member state level as well, so that we try and bring pressure to bear to ensure justice for Shireen and indeed justice for the wider Palestinian community.
Hablo yo no como presidente de la delegación.
I'm going to speak not as the chairman of the delegation, but as an MEP, not as president. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Omari for his presence and also for having insisted on explaining to us something that was not too clear, that there was a deliberate assassination by the occupying forces by shooting between the helmet and the ear. This is not an accident, and they're saying that it's accidental, and we can't accept that. Now, as an EU, as the whole institution, we can make declarations. Sometimes these declarations are perfect, other times they can be improved. But with the case of Israel, we haven't done anything. We haven't taken any measures to bring pressure to bear on Israel. We do have the mechanisms. We take measures against Russia, against Venezuela, Nicaragua, anyone who are facing the United States. But when we're dealing with friends of the United States, such as Israel, who's protected by the United States, we only make declarations where we cannot avoid this. The EU has made declarations when there was a bombing of Gaza, but now there's something happening, still things happening in Gaza. There were more than 17 deaths recently. But these declarations are insufficient. That's not enough. Clearly not enough if they're not accompanied by some action. And actions are First of all, first and foremost, suspending our association agreement with Israel, applying Article 2 that Israel has infringed human rights. They're violating the human rights of the Palestinians every day, and we need to apply this. We need to cancel Israel's participation in any program funded by the EU, such as Erasmus or Horizon Plus. It's in our hands. We can do that. If we don't do that, we, MPs here, our group, were to make this position, tomorrow itself the resolution would be accepted. It's a shame that the president of this delegation could not discuss this in Palestine. Another member of the mission of the delegation was not allowed from the Greens, a colleague from the Greens. The Vice President Borrell, then the High Representative for External Relations, did not receive them. And instead of taking reciprocal measures, as you find with any type of administration, what we're doing is inviting the president of Israel to take part in the commemoration of the Holocaust. What does the president of Israel have to do with the Holocaust? 6 million Jews died during the Holocaust, not Israelis, and Israel is exploiting the Holocaust. What does it mean that the president of this parliament goes to Israel and a representative to the Knesset by saying this great feeling that there is between the empathy between Israel and the EU because we have the same objectives? I don't have the same objectives. It's not my objective to assassinate and murder the native people of a land. We are hypocrites here. And we're not saying it, they're not just killing journalists, they're killing lots of civilians, a lot of Palestinians. That's what we're talking about. No, we want to defend freedom of expression, and we want to defend journalists. We have to do it in a consistent way. Something where we should not be ashamed. We've got to stop like a written condemnation of this murder. We've got to act. We've got to do something. We've got journalists. We're defending the freedom. We can defend the freedom of a journalist that is attacking a government that isn't ours, but we don't have any. We've got one that was in jail in Poland, Pablo Gonzalez. So we've got Julian Assange, who was tortured, was criminalized. So we must be consistent here in what we say and do. As some of our colleagues were saying, we've got to demand everyday actions against this. We've got to do it in the meetings, and we've got to do it within our groups, and we can follow things here. And now I'll give the floor to Mr. Omar again so that he can respond to the questions that were raised and the contributions made. Thank you.
Thank you again. First of all, we expressing our solidarity and sympathy with all our colleagues everywhere in this world. We believe that our colleagues, journalists, they have to do their jobs without any problems, without any obstacles, and they must be safe and going back to their homes live. Second, when we demand justice for Shireen, this means that we want to hold the killers and the responsible people accountable. At the same time, we also want to protect ourselves as journalists in general, and Palestinian and Al Jazeera journalists in particular. And at the same time, also we want to help to keep the hope for the new Palestinian generations. We don't want these new generations to lose their hope or to lose their confidence in the international legitimacy and international law and the international institutions. Israel must understand, at least, and this, I think you can help in these things, Israel must understand that it can no longer act with impunity when it harasses, intimidates, and indeed murders journalists who are trying to undertake their professional duties. Because for Palestinian journalists in the West Bank, especially in the areas, even in Gaza also, it became very difficult. They didn't have any kind of a freedom. Even there is no freedom of movement for these journalists. Palestinian journalists who want to move between Ramallah and Nablus, he will face a lot of checkpoints in his way. For Palestinian journalists, they cannot move from Ramallah to Jerusalem because they need special permission from the Israelis. The case of Shireen Abu-Akleh, it's important for all, not only Palestinian journalists, I think for everybody. At least she was in her duty, she doing her job. And for us, it's very important. Shireen, the murder of Shireen is a huge loss for us, and the grief is very deep. And the gap that she left is very huge. We cannot bridge it after a year. We're approaching a year since this murder. Tomorrow, we marking the first anniversary of this murder, and every day it is more sad than the day before. And what we need from you also, as I said, we approaching a year. Until now, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, he didn't act, and we are waiting. We appealed to the ICC. We didn't have any answers. We didn't hear anything from Mr. Khan, and I think he must act in this issue. What I mean to act, he can have a statement, he establishing an international investigative committee or send somebody, just if all these investigations are not enough, he can do that. The second thing that you can help us with it's with the American administration. They opened investigation, the FBI. We don't hear anything since November. And we knew that they knew very well all the details and all the facts. I mention here all the investigative reports, and all of them from international institutions, very famous, and their credibility is very high. And all of them, they confirm the same facts about this murder. The Israelis, and last week I was in a conference for the Foreign Press Association in Israel, and the speaker was Mr. Naftali Bennett, who was the Prime Minister. All the time, my colleagues asked him many times, and he repeated the same, that Shireen was in the mid of battle. Wasn't there any battle? Wasn't there any armed Palestinian people? Shireen was far, 120 meters from them. And even if I accept that it was mistaken, even if I am going to accept that, why they continue to shoot after she fell down in the carob tree? Why they continue to shoot, and the higher range of the effect of the bullets ranged between 127 centimeters and 178 centimeters, which means that they targeted the upper part of the body. They shoot to kill. This one thing. The second thing, I believe, and I say that many times, and I will repeat it here, they killed Shireen twice. First, when they shot her in Jenin and killed her there, and second time when they attacked the casket and the funeral inside the French hospital in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in occupied Jerusalem, which I didn't have any kind of interpretation for these things. Why they have to attack the people and the casket, dead body? Why are you afraid from what? And they were inside the hospital. They are not outside the hospital. For all of these things, and to keep confidence in the justice and the international legitimacy, We need your help just to try to contact also the prosecutor, Mr. Khan, in the ICC, and he must act. He must act in this issue. Thank you.
Gracias, señor Omari.
Thank you, Mr. Omari. Let's move on to the next point. As you know, our delegation had its visit in Palestine for the 23rd of February. We're informed you have been informed about all obstructions imposed by Israeli authorities, including their unilateral decision to ban once again the chair of this delegation, as well as of our colleague Anna Miranda Paz, from entering Palestine and denying access to the Gaza Strip to the whole delegation. We have stressed as this type of practice is unacceptable as it attempts to block the European Parliament's work. I'd like to thank all colleagues who took part in this challenging mission for their political will, commitment and flexibility. I would like to thank the Vice Chair of the delegation, Margrethe Auken, for having represented me as leader of the mission, as well as for the comprehensive report she submitted with the findings of the mission. I will give her the floor now to briefly present the main points and findings of this visit. I sent on the mission report to the chairs of AFET, DEVE and DROA, following the request of the participants of this mission to debrief the Vice President, High Representative Josep Borrell, on the outcome of the visit in accordance with the standing rules and practices. I've also requested AFET Chair David McAllister to organise an exchange of views in AFET. As soon as I have his answer, I will inform you. I now give the floor to Vice President Margrethe Auken.
Yeah, thank you, Manu, and and thank you first and foremost to our colleagues who went with us, and in this delegation here we were 7 members from 4 different groups, and I think we had a very solid representation there, although it was unacceptable that we have to live with that you, Manu, was beforehand denied access. It wasn't a surprise, but still absolutely unacceptable. And when, as a surprise, Anna Miranda was also when she was at the entrance to Israel, she was suddenly, without any warning, the opposite. We had confirmation that she could come in. She was denied access and was even treated quite badly in the airport. But that was, really negative conditions we had from the beginning. Then let me say, I'm not going through the whole program. You have our report, you have our statements and so on, so we just highlight a few important things. And my main impression, I have been there many times, that the situation is going from very bad to worse. And, before the new government, it was, as I mentioned in my question previous, the ongoing expansions of settlements, settler violence, uprooting of olive trees, demolitions, and so on and so forth, was, almost the same. But what we could see now was that the whole occupation was speeding up. We heard the second day we were there that they have even transferred the whole administration of the occupied territories from the Ministry of Defense to Interior, which means it was now they made it an Israeli case, a de jure annexation, which should be much more stressed at what is happening here. Also, again and again, against international law. We also, on our second day, had, for me at least, a very impressive meeting in Bethlehem with one of those investigating the settlements, where we saw, the whole network of roads and tunnels and so on, how they were to split up really in small pieces the West Bank. And of course, we noticed also on our travel, on our tour, that there was road constructions all over. So it's really going up with a speed we haven't seen before. And of course, that also has to be, we have to be much more clear on that. And I think again, well, it was a little bit of a comfort that Borrell afterwards was stressing in our debate that these settlements was illegal. It has been said many times, but he said it very clear. And to our, at least to my surprise, Israel was then saying, well, we won't allow Borrell in. That was I think, this not very harsh person. If he's not allowed in, then it can be really tough. But this speeding up the situation, the demolitions was speeding up. We heard you again and again that why don't we really go put a power behind the decision of having compensation for demolitions of houses funded by the EU and EU member states? Because up till now, when we have said it, not we, but the Commission have said it, but nothing happens. And that's again this year. What we heard at all our meetings is, as also said here, about the double standards. At this time, in February, of course, it was very much the speed with the Europeans reacted, to Russia with their behavior, which absolutely was as it should be. But why not Israel? And this double standard was even more, green light blinking on this tour than it's been before, and it's always been a very, very tough part. Let me then stress also that we, at this tour here, when we were around, we saw the changes which were intended. We don't know if it would happen, but which was intended when we went at the Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount. And of course, that would be extremely dangerous in the whole region if this happens, because that is the third most important place for Muslims. And up till now, and I still think that Netanyahu will be careful enough not to let this happen. But things happened up there, and they deny young or Muslims, Palestinians, to come in there. We saw also how they were treated very roughly at the Ramadan celebrating, what you call it, there, and very tough. But what we also learned and saw was that this obstruction of the religious life was against the Christians as well as it was against the Muslims. That is because not because they are Christians, because they are Palestinians. And there's no difference in the way Christians are treated. And at least even I've met Christians in Palestine many times, this stressing that there's not a special persecution of Christians. I knew that, but that it was deeply, the situation there was so much rooted in that they are, Palestinians. The first Christians, they were in Palestine. So surprising. But they are really, really under the same oppression. And the Christians were not allowed either to go to to Polka Church, the Grave Church, on Easter, because they're Palestinians. And I think that has to be stressed too. And I could refer also to what was just said by just before on the attack on the funeral of Shireen. Shireen was Christian, and we saw her coffin coming there with a crucifix on the top, and a very rough attack on her there. Everybody could see it has nothing to do with which religion it belongs to. It's only being, Palestinian, even if she's half American. So that is, for me, very important to stress that. Then the other thing I want to highlight, because it really played a role on our tour, was the lack of elections. The elections was in Palestine. I was there myself in 2006, and it was criticized from all sides except the Prime Minister, who was absolutely saying, no, we will wait. And I think he even used the phrase, until Israel will invite us to have elections in East Jerusalem. Will happen, well, it will not happen under these current circumstances for sure. And even if it had been stressed to the PA that the EU will do its best to really facilitate that voting can take place also in East Jerusalem, not only on in post offices, but also in churches and mosques and so on. Not perhaps to cover everybody, but still really strongly calling for elections, as did our EU ambassador, Mr. Burgdorf, made it very clear that he has said that again and again. And we of course also heard this from, we met a few of the political parties before we had the meetings with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, and they also said this is not acceptable that these elections are postponed. When we met journalists, it was again the same, and NGOs, they need so much a reform inside Palestine, and there we should, as their best friends, be very clear on calling for these elections to take place. We also promised them that, of course, we will send an observation delegation. We will make sure that we have, as much as we can, a proper elections as we had in 2006. I was there, and that, as I normally say, it was as boring as observing elections in Denmark. Nothing except regular elections happened. If I must mention one thing more, yes, that's about the NGOs. We had this quite, very informative meetings. We had it with several NGOs. We had dinner with them, but we had this meeting with the 6 NGOs who were condemned from Israel to be terrorists. And we, of course, all of us are very happy that the EU didn't accept that and called for proofs, which of course couldn't be provided. But they are under quite tough work under quite tough circumstances. They don't think they get sufficient support from the PA, the Palestinian security forces. That goes for the Palestinian journalists too, and I think we shouldn't hide that. But it was clear that the way Israel tried to really block them. And I don't know if any of you know what has happened to the Israeli threat to tax all the foreign funds they get with more than 60%, which means that, we will just then fuel the occupation if we send money like that. What has happened? Has the Commission responded? Has Borrell responded? I don't know if any of you know that, because I haven't had time to find out what has happened there. But I think that that is, one thing more. We stressed again and again that the only solution we can see is the two-state solution, following not a two-state, but the two-state, following the 67 borders, East Jerusalem, and so on. And you can say, and many say, well, it's out of sight. We have tried that for so long time, and nothing has happened. But the truth is, we haven't tried it. There has been no attempt to obtain this two-state. The Israelis hasn't offered anything which could forward this result from the funded back in the Oslo Agreement, and nor has really de facto the international society. So it is still, the solution we can see. If we give that up, and that was also what we stress on behalf, of course, on the EU, but it's also my personal meaning, and also when we had a travel with you might remember the funder of Breaking the Silence, Yehuda Shaul, who said this is the only outcome we can go for, as far as he can see. But I think that only when we really insist that the international society should be and needs to be much more active on insisting on withdrawal from the occupied territory, of course, lift the occupation, and then if you have any, and we should have negotiations between land swap here and there, but that cannot take place until the occupation is
terminando, por favor.
Please start to wrap up.
It's now, exactly. and of course take questions. And you can see our report, you can see our statements up to now. Yes.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias, Margaret. César.
Thank you, Margaret.
Bueno, algunas consideraciones muy rápidas.
Just a few thoughts. I don't know if we've held any official protests as a parliament. Firstly, for the fact that Manu Pineda was not able to enter Israel. And that Ana Miranda was turned away at the border. I don't know if the Parliament has carried out any sort of official protest. Although it might be a bit late, it would be good for this sort of thing to be done officially in future, because it's not good to get into the habit that no government of any state in the world should speak out about representatives being banned from entering countries. So that's my first observation. As far as possible, I think that if, on behalf of the DPAL, we can write a letter to the representatives of Parliament saying this is what's happened twice now, and that we should speak out about this officially, then that would be good. I think it's very good news that AFET has been sent this communication with Borrell, or rather that AFET is going to arrange this exchange of views with Borrell, and I hope this won't cause any problem within AFET. If I would like to volunteer to contact or encourage Mr. Borrell and the colleagues from AFET to do everything possible so that we can hold this exchange of views. So I think that good work is being done, as Margaret said, and she led the delegation very well, replacing Manu. I think that the Secretariat also did a lot of good work in the preparation and implementation of this mission. It's a difficult mission to organise, and it's difficult to carry out on the ground, and I think that the work was done in a very good way. That's what my group think. So congratulations. And then a few more ideas, 2 ideas, more of a general nature, which are in the report and have been said. These are my 2 main conclusions. Firstly, it's true that we need to say this because it lends more credibility to the cause, that even in difficult conditions, even in sometimes impossible conditions, there needs to be renewal of political life in Palestine. That's true, and we need to say it. There needs to be renewal and regeneration. We can talk to the NGOs about this to lend credibility to the cause. And secondly, I think we need to focus as MEPs on speaking out against the operation that is underway. It's no longer an occupation, that's already been done. It's being consolidated. It's reoccupying. The operation that's underway is a large-scale operation in order to expel people. That's what's going on. And I think that if we ask the people of the West Bank, that's what they will tell us. It's an occupation, yes, but now it's gone even further and people are being expelled from where they live. So we need to make sure that's present in the narrative, because that's what Europe needs to know. Not just because Europe needs to do something, but because Europe can do something. But there needs to be the will to do this.
Oui, merci.
Thank you. I think that the mission, rather, I'd like to thank everyone who was involved in the organisation of the mission. I think that was important. A lot has been said on the unacceptable refusal of the entry of 2 MEPs into Israel. That's not something innocent, and that's not something that we're just going to let go. I think that the fact that we are not accepted as a parliament and as the European Union to take it further, because it was recalled that even the High Representative for Foreign Affairs has been refused entry. So the fact that we have not yet taken any measures, any reciprocal measures, is very problematic. All international actors which want to have any sort of respect must respect themselves first. And if they say, well, we don't have any respect for the basis of things, for diplomacy, I don't understand why this country should be above the law just because it's Israel. And it was said earlier, the same goes for the destruction of projects funded by the EU. In the circumstances, it would be normal to react to this, not only by official condemnation, which is important, of course, but we need actions. We need to think about what measures we're going to take. How are we going to guarantee that this won't happen again? And for the times that it has happened, how can we guarantee that there is some sort of compensation? I'm talking about this because during the mission, we saw houses destroyed. We saw a house that had been built and was hidden so that the Israeli forces could not destroy it. So I think that's very important. Something that struck me during the mission was the attitude and the perception of the European Union by Palestinians themselves. A lot of people said to us that the European Union had seriously disappointed them. And why was that? Well, because for years the European Union said that it couldn't really do much. It wanted to facilitate a peace process, but all in all, it didn't have very many means. And these same people have seen that when there is a violation of international law by Russia, the European Union is acting very strongly via sanctions, sending weapons, by international diplomacy. There are a whole set of measures, and so it's rather hypocritical, and this is seen by the Palestinians, and it severely damages the image of the European Union, not only in Palestine but throughout the whole region and probably around the whole world. We have had an exchange with Mr. Borrell, who in the plenary session said to me that wherever he goes, he hears about this hypocrisy. People say, yes, you defend the sovereignty of Ukraine, but why aren't you defending Palestinian sovereignty? So Mr. Borrell sees that when he goes to India, for example, for the G20 summit, that's what people are telling him. Wherever he goes, people tell him this. So it's not only a principle of human rights and international law, but if we were to only think about in terms of the interests of the European Union, even for those who are only worried about that, they should still be thinking about this. And it gives us fundamental arguments to be able to say, now, let's be consistent and let's apply sanctions against colonialism and also against the annexation that we're seeing currently. I think that the mission confirmed a number of things. It allowed us to see to speed things up, as Margaret said, to see that the process is being accelerated rather on the ground. It's not something new. Sometimes we say that everything's new under the new Israeli government, but that's not true. It's a continuation of what has been going on previously. Now, that means that we have a duty and also an opportunity, as I believe, to change the position of people over here and over there, and to change the situation of hypocrisy. So that's our duty, and I'm sure that this delegation will be in agreement with me and that we could perhaps send a letter to the President if that would help. I think we need to go further based on these observations that we've been able to gather from the ground.
Thank you very much, Chair. First, I want to just compliment the Secretariat on running a really brilliant mission to Palestine. I'm sorry you weren't there, Chair. I would have added to our delegation, but it is what it is, and anything we can do to letters or whatever that will put pressure to avoid people being turned away like yourself and MEP Anna Miranda, I would be happy to sign. But just as my colleagues have said, you know, the mission, for me, it was about going and seeing on the ground what was happening in Palestine. And I believe that we really, through the support of the Secretariat, we really saw some, to my mind, atrocities. I saw, you know, as MEP Cesar Luena was saying about the consolidation. For me, it was the consolidation of occupied territories, but and the expansion of the settlements. And it, you know, it's really when you talk to people who are being displaced from their homes, literally kicked out of their homes, and moved into nothing, you know, no plans, just pushed out. And then you have, you know, the settlers coming in. And it's quite insidious just to see how the mechanism of takeover of land, you know, how it starts with maybe just a little encampment, and then, you know, the settlers, the relationships with the people they are displacing is horrific, and then the encampment becomes another, like an expansion of an encampment. Then you have a house going up, then you have another house going up, and you have this, you know, like a series of houses going up, land taken over, Palestinians being displaced. The other thing, because it was my first time going to Palestine, so you know, again, to see with your own eyes the segregation, you know, like in Palestinian areas, that sense of two-tiered system. So you go into Israeli areas, and it's quite pristine, it's quite lush, it's quite you know, well off in a sense. And then you go into Palestinian areas, and there's squalor, there's hardship, there's, you know, it's all over the place. So, you know, that kind of blatant discrimination is so apparent. And as Mark was saying, MEP Mark was saying about the just that sense of imperialism, you know, and like that it's so raw. And what the people, the Palestinians are going through, it's really, really difficult. And because of that, Chair, we really, really need to take some action. You know, and it's you know, well and good for us to sit here in the comfort of the European Parliament, but when you've come from a mission like that, you really do get the sense that you know, we. In as far as we can, we need to take action. And even where the High Commissioner Borrell was also is now persona non grata in Israel, you know, I mean, what's our problem? Why aren't we taking more really concrete action? So, for instance, again, as my colleague said about, you know, you look at how the EU is behaving in, you know, how we're supporting Ukrainian people, how we are sanctioning Russia. Well, why aren't we doing the same for in Israel? Like, why aren't we taking this? I mean, we're funding hospitals, we're funding, the EU is funding public money going into education. And meanwhile, the perpetrators, so Israeli soldiers are coming in, they're breaking it down. I mean, that's just like a misuse of our own money. So let's just stop that to begin with, you know. So I think there are actions that we should be taking. And I'll just finish by just thanking once again the Secretariat and by also, Chair, acknowledging today the murder of Shireen Abu-Akleh, and my condolences to all of Shireen's family and all of those, her colleagues and everything, and just that we remember Shireen, and not to leave her memory die.
Gracias, Grace.
Thank you, Grace. To respond to a few things that have come up, firstly, I'd like to thank you, those of you who are here and also those who are not here, all of you who were part of the delegation. I'd like to thank you for doing that. I'd like to thank you for maintaining the mission, in spite of the fact that they didn't allow me entry and that they also kicked our colleague out. We can't allow this. We can't allow what happened last year to happen again. That is to abandon the mission because I wasn't allowed to enter. At some point, we have to play on their terms because otherwise we just won't be able to go. So, firstly, I'd like to thank you for deciding to maintain this mission so that you can give your feedback from it. And thank you for this feedback as well. That's fundamental. So what we're doing here is important, but we do need to do other things. When we've seen what's happening on the ground, what the occupation forces are doing to the occupied people, we come back with another mentality, don't we? We can see things in another way, and we need to use this as a tool. This meeting is not an end in itself, it's a tool, or rather the mission, so we need to use it in any way we can. Two things I wanted to say. I wondered if it has been sent to the presidency, the fact that I was not allowed to enter, has this, or rather, this was sent to the presidency in writing a couple of months ago, I believe, and apparently there were agenda diary problems. They couldn't find a time, and they're looking for a time in their calendar when they can discuss this, as I understand it. I think it's a lack of will, personally. Well, actually, I'm sure that it's a lack of political will. Apart from the personal affinity that the President has with Israel, there is not a will to do anything at all. Mr. Borrell spoke out in plenary and he has been banned from entering too, and nothing's been done about this. So, I can tell you that I have addressed the President and I have asked for a meeting about this, and for 3 months I've been waiting and nothing has been done about it. So, after sending the request for an exchange of views to Mr. Borrell, what happens next is, or rather, our Secretariat colleagues can probably provide more information, but I don't think there's any mechanism that we can use to help to bring Mr. Borrell here to participate in this debate. I think it has to be at an AFET committee meeting. So let's hope that Mr. McAllister will sort this out. It's almost an act of faith, but let's hope it will come through. And I think that's about all I had to say. I'd just like to thank you once again, and I think we can conclude the meeting with that. Margaret. Margaret wants the floor. Over to you.
Just very brief on a few things. First of course, I should also thank Christoph for his great work. And because we were so dependent on that, thank you very much for that. And then just tell you that Metsola called me on our, next day after, and also Anna Miranda has been denied. That honestly has to be said. And of course, she said we cannot accept that our president cannot go and so on. But as you said, right, nothing has happened. So we have sent these things here. So that our report, our statement, I think I can ask Christoph, but I think the statement we made as a kind of a press release was sent also. So we haven't been passive, but of course all of you are so right. Action has to happen now, and then I will stop but just tell you that you might know there's been an attempt to an ECI on banning import from all occupied territories, Western Sahara, of course, and then Palestine. It didn't succeed, but we have now turned it into a petition, and the petitioners were there just 2 weeks ago, and it's now sent to the the Commission for a written answer. They gave an answer, but it was very weak. It was just relying back to the labeling issue, and nothing to be accepted. But still, this is working for the moment. And we should go to our own member states, telling them that according to our own laws, we should stop importing any products for the occupied territories, settlements in Palestine, settlements in Western Sahara, but now we hear about Palestine. And that is a little action to be taken, and even that will probably not happen if we don't put pressure also on our own government. But thank you very much for this very good debate.
César, un minuto nada más, que estamos ya.
César, you just have 1 minute because we're running out of time. Yes, thank you very much. You've done great work. I think that there needs to be an official protest. And I think that if you asked for an in-person or telephone conversation, then you have to have that. And we have to ask for it as a delegation. If it's been proposed, not with... not as Manuel Pineda, but as the president of DPAL, well, it's a duty and we need to insist on this. We can do that. We can submit it, not just on my personal behalf, but as a request from the whole delegation. It's a purely political institution issue. Thank you very much once again to everyone. And the date of the next ordinary meeting will be communicated to you by the Secretariat. Thank you.